In this video, I'm going to tell you why I, vegan for about 24 years, stopped taking B12 about a year ago. In this video, I'm going to review several studies that show high blood levels of vitamin B12 raise your risk of certain problems, including cancer.
Hey, this is Ryan of Happy Healthy Vegan. So on Sunday I was doing a live stream and a lot of you guys came on and were asking me if I had seen Jeff Nelson's latest video, VegSource. It was about B12 and you guys were telling me he said he's not taking B12 anymore as a vegan and showed all these studies demonstrating the dangers of B12 supplementation. So this got my interest. So I went and watched Jeff's video and I wanted to see if he's really telling people not to take B12 anymore like a lot of you guys are saying, and offer some of my comments about the interpretations of the studies he showed. Full disclaimer, I've met Jeff Nelson a few times over our course of going to many Los Angeles area vegan events, and Jeff invited us to be guests at his Healthy Lifestyle Expo conference back in 2016, and we met a lot of the vegan doctors like Dr. Neil Bernard. So yeah, as you saw in the intro of this video here where I showed the clip of Jeff saying he stopped taking vitamin B12 supplements about a year ago, which seems kind of radical, but Jeff provides some medical community-backed position about this from Dr. McDougall.
But I reserve my right to change my opinion about medications, including supplements, which in my mind are medications. And B12 is something I've been wrestling with for almost 40 years now. For one thing, it just sets wrong to me to have to be able to take any isolated concentrated nutrient to fix a good diet. That just doesn't sit right with me, never has. But based on what I know, I've had to do that. And by the way, Mary and I do take B12 ourselves.
So it sounds like Dr. McDougall just has some philosophical reservations here about taking vitamin B12. He feels like he shouldn't have to if he's eating a healthy diet. I want to point out that not every vegan eats as healthy as Dr. McDougall does. But anyway, let's see what Jeff Nelson says about vitamin B12, why he's not taking it, and are there any actual dangers associated with having too much B12 in our bodies?
When you flood your body with one or just a few nutrients, you can crowd out absorption of other nutrients and create unintended imbalances.
I personally haven't seen any studies saying that there's these potential imbalances when taking B12 as a supplement, but if you really want to see if there's any imbalances, you should get a blood test.
So B12 problems. Here's a new article that was just published a few weeks ago in the Journal of the American Medical Association. And the conclusion says, these findings suggest that higher levels of plasma concentrations of vitamin B12 were associated with increased risk of all-cause mortality after adjusting for age, sex, renal function, and other clinical and laboratory variables.
Wow, so that's a pretty startling conclusion, and I'm sure many of you guys who saw this video are probably thinking, wow, maybe B12 supplementation isn't that good of an idea, because here in this study that Jeff showed here, that those who had the highest levels of B12 in their blood had the highest risk of all-cause mortality. So once I read through the study's design, I'm not quite so convinced that this study shows that it's dangerous for people like us, relatively healthy vegans, to supplement with B12. And let me show you why. In this study, the researchers divided the results into 4 quartiles. The lowest quartile had the lowest amount of B12 blood levels, and the highest quartile had the highest levels of B12 levels. And as you'll see here, that this highest quartile of B12 blood levels, these people weren't the healthiest people in the study. They tended to be older. They tended to be more overweight. They tended to have higher levels of total cholesterol and higher glucose levels, which could indicate diabetes. Furthermore, they had the highest levels of inflammation markers such as C-reactive protein and had the highest levels of ferritin. And what is ferritin exactly? Well, Jeff talked about it in his video.
And what we see is that as B12 goes up in the blood, in the different risk group, ferritin is also elevated. Both B12 and serum ferritin are substantially elevated together in this study. Ferritin is found in meat.
So I hope you noticed that there, and let me just repeat it for you in case you didn't. As your biomarkers for ferritin increase from eating more and more meat in your diet, so do your levels for B12 increase. And the authors of this very study noted this inherent limitation to the study design, that dietary factors such as eating meat could influence both your B12 blood levels and your risk of mortality. Anyway, let's move on to the next study that Jeff presented, because this is the one that showed some link between B12 supplementation and cancer.
There's a considerable amount of evidence that higher B12 blood levels are associated with aggressive lung cancer. This study from 2017 looked at about 77,000 participants of the Vitamins and Lifestyle Vital cohort, and they found that long-term high-dose vitamin B6 and B12 use was associated with increased lung cancer risk among men.
Yeah, strangely, they found this association with lung cancer for men. Not women, though, but anyway, let's continue on.
They found for vitamin B12, 10-year use greater than 55 milligrams.
Actually, that 55 milligrams that Jeff is reading there is a typo, no fault of Jeff's. As we'll see as we read through the study more, that they meant to say micrograms. But again, let's continue on.
55 milligrams a day was associated with an almost four-fold increased risk of lung cancer among current smokers.
So once again, a pretty startling conclusion, one that might lead some of you guys to think, hey, B12 supplements are dangerous. I don't want to get lung cancer. Well, let's look what happened here. In this study, the group that had the highest supplementation of B12, that's over 55 micrograms per day, were at a nearly four-fold increased risk of lung cancer compared to those in the study that took no B12 supplements. But once again, this is a pretty odd group of subjects to generalize to just regular vegans from. First of all the subjects were between the ages of 50 and 76. So here's that startling conclusion from the study that Jeff read, the nearly four-fold increase of lung cancer for smokers. And as you see, as you move down to lower levels of supplementation, that risk decreases. But let's look here on this far left side of the chart. This is the group of subjects who haven't smoked within 10 years. And instead of a four-fold increase for those that supplemented with more than 55 micrograms per day, it's nearly 2 times increase. But look below that, for lower levels of supplementation, there's pretty much absolutely no additional risk, and in some cases, decreased risk of lung cancer. And these are for people who are supplementing. So I was wondering when I was reading through this study, I'm sure many of you guys are thinking the same thing too, how is there any connection between supplementing with more than 55 micrograms per day of vitamin B12 and increased risk of lung cancer? It just seems like there's no connection there. And you might be wondering, as I was too, is there any kind of connection that's been established by science between dietary patterns such as eating meat and increased risk of lung cancer? And for sure there is, and Jeff covered this in his video.
Well, we know that meat consumption raises your risk of lung cancer. Meat consumption and risk of lung cancer, evidence from observational studies, it concludes a high intake of red meat may increase the risk of lung cancer by about 35%. Here's another study. Dose-response analysis revealed that for every increment of 120 grams red meat per day, the risk of lung cancer increases 35%. And for every increment of 50 grams red meat per day, the risk of lung cancer increases 20%. So correlation is not causation. We can't say for sure whether it's the high B12 levels in the blood that's increasing cancer risk, or maybe that B12 is just a marker for higher red meat intake.
Great point, Jeff. Which way does the causality go? And let me point out how this can be figured out. If there's any researchers in the field watching, please let me suggest some ideas here for you. Do a study like what just happened in this study here, but have your sample, your population be done on vegans. Maybe you can find some data amongst the Seventh-day Adventists. That way you'll know for sure. If they're taking more than 55 micrograms per day of vitamin B12 and they do not have an increased risk of lung cancer, then you know you can rule out that B12 as being the cause of this lung cancer, and you can pretty much conclude that it's the meat. So anyway, let's jump forward to the part of Jeff's video where he describes why he is no longer taking vitamin B12. I think this is probably the most convincing part of his video.
Last May, I did a blood test and my B12 level was 1258, with the reference being between 232 and 1245. So my B12 level was higher than the reference. And having started supplementing with B12 maybe 20 years ago or so.
So I'm in the same boat as Jeff here with really high B12 levels, 1107 on my last test, which is still within the reference range, but on the very high end of it.
I stopped taking B12 last year. I'll be testing again in the next year or so. But for the moment, I know I'm more than fine with B12 levels and I'm going to coast.
You guys know I'm not a medical doctor, dietitian, nutritionist, or anything like that, but from my experience of having my B12 tested over the past, 6-7 years, I think Jeff is perfectly fine to do this experiment because, yeah, his B12 levels are off the charts high, beyond the reference range, and B12 levels, from how I understand them, is not a medical doctor, they don't deplete all that quickly. So I think he's doing an interesting experiment here, and I might do something similar too, because as I showed you, my B12 levels are super high, and I didn't really supplement all that much, as you guys have seen me do before. I have a sublingual B12 spray that I probably used maybe roughly 3 times a week. You know, sometimes it could have been 2, sometimes 4, but on average 3. But I'm going to get my blood tested later on this year. As you guys know, I do it every year. So I'm going to stop supplementing with my B12 spray. I have plenty of stores in my body to last. And furthermore, as you guys saw from my videos from a couple months ago about the recent discoveries that there's bioavailable vitamin B12 in the duckweed, the lentine product that I've been using from Clean Machine. So I'm sure that's more than plenty to keep me going. And I think that might be a good way to relieve some of the fears of Dr. McDougall, who didn't like these isolated, vitamins. He liked vitamins coming from whole foods, and that's why I love that lentine so much. Just a plant that's ground up. It happens to have a lot of great nutrients in there. So anyway, should you take B12 supplements? Well, I think Jeff summed it up pretty well here at the end.
So if you're a long-term vegan, test your B12 every few years. That's my advice. And if you are getting down below the low limit, then, for us, we'll be taking like 500 micrograms a week or 50 micrograms a day.
Yeah, pretty good advice from Jeff there. I'm not sure if I know what the perfect microgram dosage per day is yet or anything like that, but I'll go a step further than what Jeff said there. Not only should you get your blood tested every couple of years if you're vegan or plant-based, I strongly suggest, especially if you're new to veganism or plant-based diets, get your blood tested now. Get it started early on so you can have a baseline blood test so you can look at it later on in the future and see how things have changed. Otherwise, what a lot of people do is they don't get their blood test early on. They just wait a few years, and then they get a blood test and go, oh, I'm low in vitamin X, Y, or Z, and they blame it on the vegan diet. And that's why you got to get your baseline test first so you know where your starting points are from, or else you're just completely speculating. So I want to make it absolutely clear. Nowhere in this video did Jeff say that people should stop taking B12, that vegans don't need to take vitamin B12. He made that very clear. If you read his show description, he makes it very clear there. So I'm not sure why a lot of you guys came to my live stream and said that they're not taking B12 anymore, or Jeff's saying some crazy stuff here. I think it was a pretty reasonable video, and I just wanted to add my interpretation to the studies here. So anyway, leave your questions and comments down below. Leave me your thoughts and opinions about B12 and supplementation and anything you want to share about that. And like this video, share this video, and until next time, guys, let's vote vegan.